Hello, my name is Keith, and this is a series of videos about healthy living. If you like these videos, please click subscribe on my YouTube channel. The name of the YouTube channel is Get Healthy Now. This video was created during the Spring into Fitness Challenge, which used to be the Mayor's Fitness Challenge, where communities and organizations would compete against each other to be deemed the most fit team. Each week we included a video to provide health education during the challenge. This one is titled Fun in the Sun, Preventing Heat and Sun Damage, and Angelika Keene is the presenter.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Fun in the Sun, Preventing Heat and Sun Damage. My name is Angelika Keene, and I work for the University of Florida IFAS Extension Office. And I just want to welcome you to the Running Zone Spring into Fitness Education webinar. This is our second webinar. So we're hoping you're enjoying this information that we provide to you. So again, my name is Angelika Keene, and I'm with the University of Florida Extension Office, and this is Fun in the Sun. So the University of Florida Extension Office is an equal opportunity organization. So what you see in front of you is you just see a copy of the USDA Injustice for All presentation. So this is just something to clarify that we're equal opportunity and that we do not discriminate. So in today's presentation, it's going to be a fairly short presentation. We'll have some things for you guys to think about and kind of process and kind of discuss on your own. But just some overarching objectives for today is we want to identify kind of the normal body temperature and understand the ranges of the temperature. We want to understand how our body builds heat. There's two kind of very specific different ways that happens. We want to identify the heat-related illnesses, explain some of the symptoms so you can kind of start to identify between them, learn ways to prevent that heat illness as well as that sun damage, and then just provide you with some best practices. I know it's February, but as you can see, we're having a heat wave this particular week, which is, February 22nd. Of 2023. So it is fairly warm this time of year for us, but it's Florida. So we get very highs, we get very lows, but heat's a factor year round here. So that's just kind of something to keep mindful of. So what are some best practices when we're exercising outside? So let's dive into body temperature. The normal range of body temperature is anywhere from 97 to 99 degrees. And this is important to understand because sometimes I've heard people say things like, oh, if you're, 99, that's very close to a fever, or if you're 97, that can be very low, but actually any of those temperatures are considered normal. The idea is what is normal for you. So if you're an individual and you normally sit on the lower end, that's 97, as you're getting higher up to that 99, 100 degree temperatures, that's running higher for you. And if you're constantly somebody that's closer to that 99, that 100 degrees might not be as big of a reference point. So it's just kind of good to understand where your range is and what you kind of normally follow. But a normal healthy range is anywhere from 97 to 99. The 100 mark is still considered, it's above normal, but it's generally associated with the light sweating, some mild uncomfortability, and maybe some dizziness, again, depending on how close you sit to that kind of range for you. So again, those are all within ranges you want to be aware of, but you want to kind of keep in mind of normal. So those could be in them. When we start getting into the temperatures past 100, started getting into things like 102 to 104, that's where we really want to look at this heat related and this body temperature component, because that's where the heavy sweating comes in, dizziness, fatigue. That's when a lot of the illnesses, heat related illnesses, start to occur and the symptoms start to occur. And we really want to be mindful of what those symptoms are and how we're treating them for both ourselves and others. So what is heat stress? So we're kind of talking about this whole overarching component of heat stress. And what heat stress is it's just your body's regulatory process. So your body, you generate the heat, you have air temperature, humidity, your clothing, all of these play a factor into how your body reacts to heat and how stressed it becomes and that internal temperature going up and down. And so with that, there's two major kind of causes of heat in our body. And so the first is you have your outside heat. And your outside heat is exactly what it sounds like. It's all of those external factors. So it is, how hot is it outside? Is it breezy? What's going on, are you sitting in a hot car, all of those external things. And then you also have your internal heat, and this happens when we work hard. Our muscles actually generate heat inside of our body, so you're getting heat from two ways. You're getting it from what you feel outside or what the temperature is externally, but then you also get it with whenever you're working out or strenuously moving, whether it be through exercise or outdoor work. Those muscles are generating that heat. And that's important to understand because that affects how our body regulates our temperature. And this is important to understand because both factors happen at the same time. So whether you're in an controlled air conditioning environment, then you maybe not so much worried about the outside heat, except for maybe depending on what your clothing is, because your clothing can wear a factor too. If you're inside, but you're in air conditioning, but you're wearing heavy like jackets and things like that, that can also play a factor in and then starting to work out. So you have both your internal and external kind of heat components. But what happens is your hypothalamus is a section in your brain, and it actually sets that standard temperature. So remember we talked about the natural range is anywhere from 97 to 99. So that hypothalamus actually sets what's your standard, what's your normal, kind of what's your average. And what happens is the body temperature either it raises or lowers, but we're going to focus today on just raising. And that could be from external factors, as in like outdoor heat, or from you working out. And once that temperature raises, it sends a signal to your nervous system to your sweat glands to actually start releasing the sweat inside your skin and secreting that water and salt combination that we refer to as sweat. What happens then is the sweat's released. The external environment, so the outside, kind of helps to absorb that sweat. So meaning the sweat evaporates from your body and it cools your body down. And once your body hits a regular temperature or lowers that temperature down, then it sends a signal back up to say, hey, we're back at a normal body temperature, and the cycle continues. Kind of like a thermostat, but much more precise, where a thermostat will kick on and kick off. Our hypothalamus is always working, so it is consistently changing back and forth. And that's why sometimes you've ever had that moments where you're sitting in a meeting and you start to get nervous. You've got that nervous energy going, and so that's sending that signal. Your internal body's making heat, and you start to sweat a little bit. It cools you off, and then you feel a little better. Same thing with standing outside. You walk outside for a minute and you're outside, you're doing some work, you come inside and the air conditioning, all of a sudden you notice, whoo, man, I'm really starting to sweat. And partly why heat is such an important topic to talk about, especially in the state of Florida, is how your body cools is that evaporation of the sweat from outside, meaning that on super humid days with no breeze, there's nowhere for that sweat to go. You're just, that moisture on moisture is just kind of sitting there. And so that temperature never starts to come down. That's why taking the steps to care for heat-related illnesses, especially in the state of Florida, especially during exercise and different things, is so important. But it's also another factor is you have that heat-related components as sun damage and skin damage. We're not going to dive too much into that, but we do want to talk about that simultaneously because we want to prevent illness, but we also want to prevent long-term damage as well. So heat illness includes anything from heat rashes, sunburns, because that's that sun damage component, heat cramps, fainting, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. And what's important to understand is that fatalities have happened, but there are things that can be prevented with the proper care and proper awareness. So we really want to be mindful of that. So we're going to kind of break down each one individually. as an overview of some of the signs and symptoms. So we're going to start with our heat rash. So our heat rash, some of the causes is when it's very humid and those sweat glands start to things, and you start to get very constricted, and you don't have the opportunity to kind of get rid of it. So it usually comes with things like red and bumpy rashes. Sometimes it's severely itching. This one is very mild in the concern of the scale of from like heat illness scale. It's frustrating. It's something to be aware of, but it's kind of a simpler one, something that to be mindful of, something to take care of, but nothing that needs to be taken to necessarily urgent care or things like that. So the treatment is, again, we want to get you out of that hot environment. We want to get you into those dry clothes, because again, that heat rash comes when that sweat happens and that is rubbing, and you can't actually release that heat or that component. So then we have your sunburn. Your sunburn is kind of your next level. And again, that sunburn ranges from all different extremes. But again, it's just caused from exposure to outside to the sun. And this is really important to understand, that you are getting UVA and UVB rays, and that's what actually causes the sunburn. A lot of people think that, and I've heard people say this before, where, oh, it's not sunshiny outside, so I can't get sunburnt. And that's a false statement. That's a myth. You can actually completely get a sunburn sitting in the shade. And the reason for that is, even though you're in the shade, you're still getting exposed to those UVA, UVB rays. And that's why it's really important to make sure that you're paying very close attention to what sunscreen you're wearing, how often you're reapplying it, and where you're doing. So symptoms, again, can be red, painful, blistering, and peeling. Treatment is make sure you're no longer in the sun, and then apply the appropriate lotions to help kind of, and if they become very big blisters, seeking medical treatment when necessary. So next is kind of the heat cramps and heat fainting are kind of progressions of each other. So, you start to get overheated, and, you start to have that cramping and painful, whether it be in your leg or your stomach. Kind of the most common areas. Sometimes it can be in your arms, but a lot of people will say they feel like it's in their stomachs, their sides, or their legs. And the main thing here is that when you start to realize that you're moving into that direction, you're starting to get into the point where you really need to really pay attention and start to be like, hey, I need to make sure that I stop and do what I need to do to treat this, because we don't want it to progress from there. We don't want anything to progress, but this is where we're starting to get into concern. So the treatments for both is that you're removing again into that cool area. You're going to loosen clothing. You're going to, have somebody, if they're conscious, sip the cool drinking water. And if they fainted, be mindful, if it's progressed to that fainting, how do they need that medical care in the sense of like CPR? Are they breathing? Is there more going on? Okay. So these, like I said, are kind of, they go in a hierarchy from like least to greatest. And we're really starting to get into that middle section where we really start to need just kind of more intense care. So this is where we dive into heat exhaustion. And heat exhaustion happens when that process I told you of the temperature rises, the body cools, it starts to break down. Whether it be your sweat is completely depleted, meaning you don't have any more water in your system to actually help to expel the temperature, or you're just overdone it and your temperature is just getting way too high internally and you're really starting to struggle. So with that, this one is where we really want to start having care immediately. And the symptoms of this can be, like I said, that heavy sweating, very high body temperature. Your pulse either can get really high or really low, depending on your body functions. You start to get that very tired, clumsy, so you're thirsty, you can have blurred vision in here. And these are symptoms that you really want to pay attention to, because these are ones that need that medical treatment. So we want to call 911 right away. We want to move that person to the shade and start to cool them down slowly. So another thing that a lot of people think is like, oh, let me get this person as cool as possible, as quickly as possible. We want to do it in slowly. And that's where moving them to the shade, getting off, removing any loose or excess clothing is going to slowly bring down the temperature, having them sip that cool water and then fanning them. And again, that fanning is so important because, like we talked about, in really humid environments, that sweat that is your body's way of reducing that heat can't evaporate. So by fanning that individual, you're helping to allow that body temperature to come down naturally and very slowly. But again, heat exhaustion is, like we talked about, is kind of that hierarchy. Heat exhaustion is one that when we've gotten to that point, we really need to we need to treat it, take care of it, but we also need to get that medical aid as quickly as possible. And then your last, sorry, just making sure. The last is heat stroke. Okay. And this is when your body can no longer regulate, that it is just way too high of a temperature. None of the systems are working correctly. And it starts to almost set it to where things are starting to stop, meaning your sweat has totally stopped. Your system doesn't know what's going on, and you're just really struggling. At this point, again, you immediately need to, if you see someone in these symptoms, get 911 and get them out of that sun or get them out of that heated area. And so these are things like that very high body temperature, weakness, confusion, their pulse. They usually get very disoriented, very, very dizzy, fainting. They usually have a hard time communicating at this point, expressing. They have a hard time even like sipping water. They start to lose kind of control of what's going on around them. And so again, that first treatment step is getting them immediate care, getting them in that shade as quickly as possible, and then just going through the same simple steps, removing any excess clothing, fanning them to cool them off, and like I said, helping them to sip that water, because sometimes that's not something they're capable. They can sip it on their own, but sometimes they have trouble like holding onto the bottle and things like that. And so just kind of thinking that all of these progress from where we started. We started with the fact that we have an internal body temperature. Our body temperature raises, our system works correctly because our bodies are amazing, and lowers us down, which is why we don't all just move into heat stroke every single day in the state of Florida. We have this kind of progression, and our body does this specifically to allow us to recognize these signs and symptoms, but still be able to enjoy all the beautiful fun in the sun that Florida has to offer. So we just want to be mindful of where we are to the care we need to take. So there are some ways that really help to prevent ever progressing into some of these illnesses and heat-related symptoms. And that can be all the way back from the sunburn all the way to heat stroke, and they're the same kind of prevention strategies. So that way we get to enjoy all that Florida has to offer and all of the wonderful weather that we do get. And that is, so when it comes to that sunburn part, making sure that you're using sunscreen and reapplying it regularly. So there's been lots of discussion about how intense the sunscreen needs to be. A minimum of 15 SPF. 15 to 30 is kind of your minimum. You definitely have the opportunity to go higher, but really science has proven that anything lower than that isn't preventing those UVA, UVB rays from getting into your system. So you automatically are going to get sunburn quicker. And then that's going to help create that like loop of, now we're getting hotter from those external factors and continuing on. Things like covering up when you're outdoors. So wearing long sleeve shirts, hats, and making sure you're drinking lots of water. Now, when we say long sleeve shirts, I'm not saying outside in sweatshirts. I'm saying those loose, light fitting clothing, usually in neutral colors. White can actually sometimes, the UV rays, the UVA B and A rays still get through. So sometimes those like neutral colors, such as like tans or light blues, are great because they help alleviate the heat from your body, but they're also giving you that additional sun protection. Hats are fantastic, especially when you have those wide brim hats. I know they're not always the fashion statement, but they do help to really protect you. And be mindful of your hats, because if your hats have the little holes in them, like a lot of the sun hats do, and trust me, I have a ton of them, but each little hole is allowing those, again, those UVA and UVB rays to come in. So even if you're sitting in the shade wearing your hat, you still have to make sure you've got that sunscreen on. Okay. Make sure that you're consuming lots of water, lots of fluids, but also some electrolytes too. So when you're, especially if you're exercising, be mindful of, yes, we want you drinking water. Yes, we absolutely want you drinking water before exercise, during exercise, and after. But also, if you're, especially if you're outside and you are sweating a lot, that sweat is a combination of water and salt. So you have to put that salt back into your system. And one of the more efficient ways to do that is through electrolytes. So just kind of keep that in mind in the fluid intake. It also helps to avoid alcohol and excess caffeine, especially when you know you're going to be out and about. And then again, just being aware of those signs and symptoms and having these conversations with your friends and family so that you know where you are and where you need to have care taken care of. So now let's dive into specifically exercising. So everything we've talked about up until this point was kind of that overarching, here's just general heat related information. Here's some good sun information to prevent skin cancer and damage, as well as heat related illnesses, but specifically for exercise. Here are some best practices. So the first is to exercise early in the morning or late in the evening. And the reason is the temperatures are cooler and there's generally those breezes going early in the morning or late afternoon. So again, that helps your body to sweat and the environment to evaporate that sweat, to keeping it temperature cooler. Drink fluids, like I said, lots and lots of fluids. If you do have to exercise in the middle of the day, being mindful of what type of exercise. So if you're somebody that loves to run, or if you're an avid cyclist or you like Zumba, going to those early morning classes or those later evening classes, if they're outside, are a great opportunity. If you're somebody that, is going out on your lunch break, maybe doing something a little less strenuous, like going for a walk, doing some more slower yoga or Tai Chi that allows you to still work your muscles, still work out, but have a little bit more control over how intense that exercise is. The best, of course, is in the middle of the day. It's just to move it into an air conditioning environment because, again, as we talked about, then you still have that internal heat, those muscles working and firing, raising your temperature, but then you don't have as much factor from the outside. And so it allows you to control one of those two variables to kind of keep things. And so I hope, again, my name is Angelika Keene, and I'm with the University of Florida Extension Office. I know this has been a quick, broad overview, but I hope that you'll be inspired to kind of be aware as the temperature rises, as we move into that summertime, to still get out and enjoy exercise, hikes, walks, days at the beach, surfing, all of those opportunities that we have here, but in a safe and healthy way. So I want to thank you again for joining me, and my contact information is on the screen if you have any questions.